way we often work is we get an agricultural land grant institution, UC Davis or UC Berkeley or Michigan State, and the experts come up with, here's a better seed, or here's a better kind of livestock, here's a better technique for planting, here's a better machine, this or that. And then the goal is, okay, we know best. We're going to go to country X and we're going to show them how this works and we're going to get them to do it. And sometimes that works, but often what happens is that they want to do different things with it or use it in different ways or for different purposes. And we tend to be very fixed in how this works, because we're the expert, we invented it, we know how this should be done, as opposed to going with the flow and sort of saying, well, if this is what the market is demanding, how do we respond to that? As opposed to, here's the 5-year plan, and we are going to implement this year after year after year, and if we're getting pushback or resistance, the response is to try harder, to do more, to push harder, to have more marketing, as opposed to adapt and be flexible and to go in a slightly different direction. And so, as we learned in the maize case in Zambia, the initial push from USAID and Gates, among others, were funding this together, was we were interested in drought-tolerant maize, but the farmers weren't that interested in it to begin with. They were interested in hybrid maize. They were interested in higher yields. Now that they're all adopting hybrid maize and the climate change has really taken in, that we've made an incremental change that allows us to make another incremental change. We go from old hybrid maize to new hybrid maize to specific drought-tolerant varieties of hybrid maize. But to go with what farmers want, as opposed to, we have a mandate to do conservation agriculture to address climate change now, and even though the farmers aren't responding to that, we're just going to try harder as what would be an intermediate step that we could do now, given where they are, that would get us halfway? We have to be flexible. I mean, this is what is all the trend now in Silicon Valley and startups and social enterprises, is fail often and early, okay? And unfortunately in development, the mantra has been fail never or later. In other words, force it to work for 5 years, and then if it all falls apart afterwards, who cares, okay? As opposed to, let's make a lot of mistakes and let's learn from the mistakes, as opposed to, we have to get it right because our contract is premised on us getting numbers, as opposed to doing it the right way.
I think making sure that you're not solely looking at the agronomic context or even the economic context for the farmers, but trying to more rigorously map those against the current social context, historical continuities in all of those sectors. Doing that design up front is going to save you a lot of mistakes, and it's going to save you a lot of money and time, and ensure probably the best sustainability, and make sure that your design is as optimized for that specific context as possible.
And somehow we often introduce new technologies that clearly often have much higher returns, but they involve much more investment, and especially for small farmers with limited resources, they're a lot riskier. The more money you put on the table, the more you have to lose. And I think in the case of Zambia, the fact that both the input side and on the output side, the government intervened, and with significant problems with that intervention, but that made those inputs accessible at low cost and low risk, and particularly made increased production of maize very safe for them, that they had pretty much a guaranteed market at a good price. In the initial stages of scaling and introductions of new technologies, I think absolutely critical. It doesn't have to be a government subsidy program. There are lots of other ways to do it. And I think working with commercial partners, the real art of this business is, how do you design that risk mitigation, and sometimes it does take this form of subsidies or co-financing, in a way that doesn't distort their incentives, that doesn't permanently spoil the market. Well, you gave it away for 5 years, why are we paying for it now? And finding that balance, and that's a real art to it. And I think that's an area where a lot more research could be done.
So, I mean, one thing that didn't come out is that in the discussion earlier that is worth mentioning is that the maize market is very different from the rest of the input supply sector, just for a number of different reasons. But these input suppliers that we talked to were looking at the full range of inputs, and outside of maize, there was virtually no engagement with smallholder farmers prior to the profit project within the input suppliers that that the project had worked with. And so there was some unique and I think very justifiable attribution to the profit program's activities in terms of shifting their focus across their portfolio outside of just maize, in terms of looking at smallholder farmers, and through buying down the risk that it took to a certain extent in terms of helping them subsidize some of these costs to reach out, but also just helping them break into some of these localized social networks, and help them think through some methodologies around that. And I think that is significant because the dynamics on the maize side are so different that I think you can pretty justifiably argue that FRA and FISIP have had overwhelming effects in terms of the dynamics in terms of smallholder adoption there. I think that it's less applicable to other sides of the input supply sector.